Welcome to our channel. Today we're going to talk about something that few understand but that has a profound impact on our lives. How to demonstrate your value in silence. Before we continue, let me ask you, how many times have you felt like you needed to prove something to someone? What if there was a more powerful way to show who you are without saying a single word? Society teaches us that we need to scream to be heard. But the truth is that silence carries incomparable strength. In the silence, there is the language of the wise, of those who fully trust who they are. Jesus, in many moments, chose silence. When Pilate asked who he was, he did not argue. Jesus' silence echoed louder than any words could. Have you been using silence as a valuable tool? Or have you been getting lost trying to explain everything to everyone? Silence challenges us to trust the process. He teaches us that we do not need external approval to know who we are. It is in silence that we often find the most important answers. Why, then, are we afraid to use it? Let's explore together how this powerful tool can transform your life and your view of your own worth. Have you ever reflected on how life's true treasures need no introduction? Think about this for a moment. The stars in the sky do not blink. To attract our attention, the rivers do not announce their strength, and yet their existence profoundly impacts the world around them. The same goes for you. Your value is not in the words you speak or the arguments you present, but in the way you live your life. The society we live in constantly pressures us to prove who we are. There is an almost desperate need to show off achievement, to convince others that we are worthy. That's why social media is full of people showing off their accomplishments, posting their perfect lives, and trying in every way to seek validation. But the crucial question is, does this really prove anything? In silence, we find a different way of living. The life of Joseph, son of Jacob, offers us a powerful example of this. Sold into slavery by his own brothers, Joseph could have fallen into despair or even revenge. He had reason to scream, to demand justice. But instead, he chose to live his faith quietly and confidently. He worked diligently, remained faithful to God, and let his actions speak louder than any words he could say. Have you ever wondered what your actions are saying about you? Does your life reflect the values you claim to have? This is often easier said than done, but it is in the doing that the true value appears. When we work with integrity, even when no one is looking, when we choose the right path even, if it is the most difficult, we are showing the world who we really are. Joseph's story also teaches us that silence does not mean absence of action. On the contrary, it means acting with purpose without the need for fuss. When Joseph was put to the test in Potiphar's house, he didn't need to justify himself. His choice to flee temptation clearly demonstrated his character and his faithfulness to God. In moments like these, we realize that value is not found in words, but in the courage to live according to our principles. And you? How have you demonstrated your value? Has it been through words or actions? Perhaps you are trying too hard to convince others of something that is actually already clear to God. He knows your heart. He knows the effort you make, even when no one else sees it. This is a truth that should free us from the need to prove something to anyone. Another important point is that, by living this way, you also inspire other people. Imagine a flame that silently illuminates everything around it. She doesn't need to shout that she's brilliant. Its light speaks for itself. When you live with purpose, your life becomes that flame. Those around you will see your light, even if you don't point it directly. However, living this way requires deep trust. Trust in God, who works behind the scenes in your life, and trust in yourself, knowing that you are valuable regardless of the opinions of others. It's not easy, I know. We all face moments when we feel the need to explain, to justify. But instead, how about trust? Remember Jesus' words in the Sermon on the Mount. You are the light of the world. A city built on a hill cannot be hidden. He teaches us that when we live according to His will, our worth will shine for all to see. Not because we shout or demand attention, but because our lives will be a reflection of God's character. Finally, I want you to think about something. When was the last time you let your actions speak for you? Maybe it was in a situation where you chose silence over confrontation, or maybe it was when you worked hard without seeking recognition. Whatever the case, I want to encourage you to keep going. Not because you need to prove something, but because living this way is the greatest demonstration of faith we can offer. Have you ever stopped to reflect on the power that silence can have? We live in a noisy world where communication is constant, where everyone has something to say, and it seems that silence has almost been forgotten. However, there are times when it is more powerful than any words we can utter. Silence not only communicates but also reveals deep truths about ourselves and those around us. When we think of silence, we often associate it with weakness or passivity. But is this true? In the Bible, we find countless examples of how silence was used in a strategic and transformative way. An example that inspires us is Jesus Christ himself. At his trial before Pilate, he chose not to defend himself. He knew that in certain circumstances, silence communicates more than words. By remaining silent, he demonstrated his confidence in God's plan and the truth he carried. And you? Have you underestimated the power of silence? How many times, in moments of conflict, have you felt the need to speak up, to justify yourself, only to realize later that no words would have changed the situation? Silence, when used wisely, has the power to disarm the enemy. It stops emotions from taking over and creates space for the truth to reveal itself. Silence also helps us listen. In Psalm 46:10, we find a profound invitation. Be still and know that I am God. This verse teaches us that when we are silent, not just in words but in our hearts and minds, we can hear God's voice more clearly. How many times have you tried to hear God amidst the noise? Could it be that instead you need more moments of silence to realize the direction He is pointing your life? But make no mistake, silence is not empty. It is a break full of meaning, a space where we can reflect, learn, and grow. Think about a dialogue. It's not just words that create connection, it is also the silence between them that gives rhythm, that allows the message to be absorbed. Likewise, in our lives, silence creates space for God to work and for others to see who we really are. In conflict situations, silence can be a sign of strength. This is not about omission, but about wisdom. When someone provokes us or attacks us verbally, the immediate reaction is to respond. However, when we choose silence, we show that we are governed by something greater than our emotions. This choice requires self-control and courage. Think about the last time you faced a stressful situation. How did you react? Could the silence have spoken louder than any response you gave? Furthermore, silence is a great ally when we want to demonstrate our value. When we are consistent in our actions and allow them to speak for us, we do not need speeches or justifications. Imagine a professional who does his job with excellence, without the need for self-promotion. Your silence is not an absence. It's a presence that says, I'm here, doing what needs to be done. However, using silence as a tool requires wisdom and discernment. There are times when it is necessary to speak, and there are times when silence is more appropriate. How can we discern the difference? The answer lies in seeking God's direction. When we are aligned with Him, we are able to identify when it is time to act and when it is time to quiet our soul. Finally, I want you to think about the impact silence can have on your relationships. Often, words create barriers, while silence builds bridges. It is in silence that we find space to forgive, to understand, and to truly connect with others. Silence is not the absence of communication. It is often the most profound way of communicating. So the next time you feel compelled to speak, ask yourself, would silence be a more powerful response? Would He not allow the truth to shine more brightly? Remember, silence is not a weakness, but a strength that few know how to use. There is an old proverb that says, talk is silver, but silence is gold. However, if we could adapt this phrase, perhaps we could say, talk is good, but action is better. We live in an era where words are thrown to the wind, but consistent, silent action has become a rare commodity. If you truly want to demonstrate your value, you need to understand that the true impact is not in what you say, but in what you do. Jesus, our greatest example, showed us this truth on many occasions. Although His words carry eternal weight, He was never someone who depended on them alone to impact lives. His way of acting, his humility, his compassion, and his miracles spoke louder than any speech he could give. Think about the moment he washed the disciples' feet. He could have given a sermon on humility, but he chose to demonstrate, through his actions, what it truly means to serve. Now look at your own life. What have your actions communicated to the people around you? It's easy to talk about values like integrity, kindness, and faith, but have you lived up to them? Imagine someone who constantly talks about honesty, but is dishonest in small everyday ways. Or someone who preaches love for others, but treats the people around them with indifference. What really impacts are not the words that come out of our mouths, but the coherence between what we say and what we do. The Bible is full of teachings that encourage us to live this way. In the book of James, we read that faith without works is dead. This means that our belief in God must translate into concrete actions, and these actions don't have to be grand. Often it's the small gestures made in silence that have the biggest impact. A smile, an act of generosity, a moment of genuine listening. It all says more about who you are than any speech ever could. But why is it so difficult to live this way? Part of the challenge is that, as human beings, we have an almost innate need to be recognized. We want our actions to be seen and valued. However, true value lies in acting with excellence, even when no one is looking. When you work diligently, not to impress others but to honor God, your actions begin to speak for themselves. A practical example of this can be found in the workplace. Imagine two professionals, one who constantly talks about his achievements, but whose quality of work leaves something to be desired, and another who rarely talks about himself, but whose actions are consistent and exemplary. Which of these two is more respected in the long run? What is most impressive is not what we say about ourselves, but what we do with our abilities and opportunities. The wisdom of saying little and doing a lot also applies to relationships. How many times have promises made in words been broken? And how many times have small unspoken actions demonstrated deep love? A gesture of care, such as helping someone without being asked or supporting a friend in silence, speaks much more than empty statements. True love, genuine friendship, and solid character are built with actions, not speeches. Another important point is that acting with purpose creates a legacy. Words may be forgotten, but actions are remembered. Think about the people you admire. You probably admire them more for what they did than what they said. An example of this is Mother Teresa of Calcutta. His words were beautiful, but it was his actions, caring for the poorest of the poor, that left a lasting impact on the world. Ultimately, living this way requires humility. When we choose to talk less and act more, we give up the need to be applauded. This doesn't mean you should hide your achievements, but that they should be a natural consequence of your actions, not something you constantly seek to show off. So how can you start practicing this wisdom today? Maybe it's as simple as keeping a promise you made, even if no one is expecting it. Or maybe it's demonstrating excellence in a small task that you would normally do anyway. Either way, remember that the impact is not in the words but in the legacy your actions leave. Conflicts are part of life. Whether at home, at work, or even among friends, it is inevitable that at some point our opinions, values, or emotions will clash with those of another person. What defines who we are is not the fact that we face conflicts, but how we choose to react to them. And often, the wisest response is not in fiery words but in strategic silence. It's natural to want to respond when we're confronted. Our first reaction tends to be defensive, especially if we feel that our dignity or values are being questioned. However, the Bible teaches us a different path. In Proverbs 15:1 we read, "A gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up wrath." Now think beyond bland words. What about when no words are the best answer? Silence in moments of conflict is a powerful tool that demonstrates self-control and wisdom. But why is silence so effective? First, because he gives us time. Instead of reacting impulsively, silence creates a pause. This moment of reflection allows us to assess the situation more clearly and choose a response that is aligned with our values. When we speak without thinking, we often end up saying things we don't mean to, and that can make the situation worse. Silence protects us from this. Jesus gave us the perfect example of how silence can be a demonstration of strength. During his trial, he was accused, insulted, and ridiculed, but he remained silent before his accusers. He knew that no words would change the minds of those who were already determined to condemn him. His silence was not an omission, but a conscious choice to trust in God's plan rather than engage in fruitless debate. Now think about your own life. How many times have you found yourself in an argument where, after much arguing, you realized that you couldn't change anything? Perhaps, if I had chosen silence, the situation would have been resolved more peacefully. This does not mean that you should omit yourself or avoid necessary conflicts, but that silence can be the best response in moments of tension, especially when emotions are running high. In addition to protecting our peace, silence in times of conflict has a disarming effect. When someone is angry or aggressive, they expect their reaction to be of the same intensity. But when you choose silence, you break the cycle of hostility. This can not only disarm the other person, but also open up space for them to reflect on their own actions. However, using silence requires discernment. There are times when we need to speak out, especially to defend the truth or protect the most vulnerable. But even in these moments, the way we speak matters. Strategic silence is not about avoiding conflict, but about approaching it with wisdom and control. Another advantage of silence in conflicts is that it preserves relationships. Words spoken in moments of anger can cause deep wounds that take years to heal. But by choosing silence, you avoid saying something you might regret later. This doesn't mean you should ignore problems or pretend they don't exist, but that you can choose the right time to address them constructively. Think, for example, of a heated argument at work. Your colleague says something that you find offensive or unfair. The first reaction may be to respond immediately, but this will likely increase tension. Now imagine that you take a deep breath, choose silence, and then, in a calmer moment, talk to him respectfully. Which approach would have a greater impact? Silence also helps us listen. Often in conflicts, we are so focused on defending our point of view that we don't hear what the other person is saying. Silence allows us to absorb and understand what the other person is trying to communicate, even if we don't agree. This could be the key to resolving conflicts peacefully and effectively. Finally, silence in times of conflict is an act of trust in God. It's recognizing that we don't always need to have the last word, because we know that He is in control. When we choose silence, we are saying, "Lord, I trust you will handle this situation." This act of faith not only gives us peace, but also glorifies God because it shows that our trust is in Him, not in our ability to argue or win debates. So, the next time you find yourself in conflict, ask yourself, would silence be the best response right now? Remember that silence is not weakness, but a strength that few can master. Demonstrating value in silence is not just a life strategy. It is, above all, an act of faith. It's an intentional choice to trust that you don't need to scream to be heard, because God knows your heart, and He is the one who validates your effort. In today's world where everyone seems to compete for attention, silence becomes a powerful demonstration of trust in something bigger than ourselves. Let's reflect on this. How many times have you felt the need to justify yourself or prove something to the people around you? Whether at work, at home, or even on social media, it's easy to fall into the trap of thinking we need constant validation. But the Word of God teaches us the opposite. In Isaiah 30:15 we read, "In repentance and rest is your salvation. In quietness and trust is your strength." Silence in this context is a manifestation of faith, a reminder that God is in control, even when circumstances seem to challenge us. When you choose to trust God, rather than relying on your own words or actions for recognition, something extraordinary happens. Your life begins to reflect a peace and strength that is undeniable. People notice. They see that there is something different about you. And this difference does not come from what you say, but from the way you live and the faith you demonstrate, even in silence. Remember, God is behind the scenes, seeing every little effort we make, every difficult choice we make, and every moment we choose silence over noise. There is no need to try to impress Him. He already knows the value of your heart. And it is this trust that makes silence not just a choice, but a powerful declaration of faith. Now I want to challenge you. Reflect. How can you use silence as an act of faith in your daily life? Maybe it's by avoiding responding to that criticism that you know isn't constructive. Maybe it's by stopping seeking human recognition for what you already know pleases God. Or maybe it's simply by spending more time in silence before Him, allowing Him to speak to your heart. And while you think about it, remember that silence does not mean inactivity. Rather, it means targeted action. Actions done with purpose, guided by trust in God, have an eternal impact. Think about what you can start doing today in silence that will speak louder than 1,000 words. To finish, I want you to look at your journey so far. How many times has God taken care of you when no one else could? How many times has He supported you in silence in the moments when you needed it most? It is this same God who will continue to guide you and honor you, even when no one else recognizes what you are doing. Now let me make a special invitation. If you liked this video and believe it can inspire other people, like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Activate the bell so you don't miss our next videos. But don't stop here. Take advantage and click on the video